Good morning and good evening and good night, depending on where you are in the world. Um, let me share my screen. There we go. Okay. So my name's Gareth. I'm a motion graphics designer. We've got quite a lot to cover today, so I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about me very quickly. So I'm going to tell you three things. First thing is Alien. The movie Alien was the first time I ever noticed or was aware of title sequence and how amazing they can be. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it has these titles that come up and it takes about 2 minutes for the word alien to be revealed. It was blew my mind. Well, I mean, the whole movie did, but that was just amazing. I didn't realize what I was doing until much later in life, but I used to record the beginnings of film movies, the opening credits, and just put them back to back on VHS and just watch those over and over again. It was only later in life that I realized I was heading in the right direction with my career. There's something about title sequences that I just love. And lastly, Amiga, which is girlfriend in some languages, but this is the name of probably what is the best computer ever made. It's where I got my start in animation and graphics. And I highly suggest that all of you go have a look at it and videos about it. It's an amazing piece of hardware and software. Right, so my talk is called The Last of the Renderers, and I'm going to be looking at different render engines, obviously, that are used inside Blender. Specifically, we've got Blender Cycles, obviously, and Eevee, which almost everyone will know about. But we've got Pro Render from AMD, Lux Core Render, and Appleseed. And I'll just give you a little bit of story behind this, like how I got into this. I was at a motion graphics meetup in the east of London a few years ago, and most motion graphics people use Cinema 4D, some Max and stuff like that. And we were just talking renderers, and everyone's V-Ray this and Octane that. And I was like, well, have you heard of Blender for one, and then Cycles? And then I said, there's other render engines. And so a whole conversation started around that. And then I said, well, you know what? I'm going to go back and I'm going to do some example scenes for you guys to show you what these different render engines do. Well, 2 years later, and I'm still pottering around with these different render engines. It's very interesting. So I thought my talk today would be just to show you what I've done so far, my thoughts and that sort of thing. So sort of little messages up front is, obviously this is going to have a natural bias because I'm skilled in certain renderers and much less so in others, as you'll see. So this isn't going to be a competition type thing about which renderer is better than others. I mean, all of these are very good, and they all have strengths and weaknesses, obviously. It's more just a talk about, let's explore that. Well, what does this do? What does that do? If you didn't know about it, well, now you can get some exposure. Maybe it interests you that you want to go have a look at it yourself. And the other sort of thing that I would say is that these are, there's going to be a fair amount of user error with some of the examples I show you. So there's going to be a lot of artists and people who use these other render engines that create stuff that is frankly just incredibly amazing. So have a look at my stuff and then go have a look at what other people do with these things as well, because it is really impressive. Okay, so to start off with, I'm going to show you my very first render, and this I actually have on my YouTube channel. So this was my first sort of test of what I'm doing, and it's a little video clip, and let me play it for you. Okay, so let me just spool through this. So obviously you can see some of these things will look horrific, like that RenderMan. This was in Blender 2.79, and I clearly don't know how to do glass in RenderMan. Incredibly powerful package, but my initial reference point was obviously Cinema 4D, which is over here. And it has a gorgeous renderer. And this is just the internal renderer that Cinema 4D has. It's not the Pro Render one. So this was a good start, just getting used to things and that sort of thing. And I then decided, okay, well, let me branch out and let's make something a little bit more substantial. So I took these words, these letters, the word render, and had them bashed together. I've got a clip. But basically, what I decided to do with this one is just focus on these render engines that you're going to see today, because RenderMan looks like its development or its involvement, the Blender plugin that will work in 2.8 has sort of ceased development. So I've decided to leave that aside for now. And, Cinema 4D is great and all, but I really wanted to focus on what I can do inside Blender. So let me just play this clip. Okay, so that's all of it moving. We'll just go now and have a deeper look. Right. Okay, so with all of these comparisons and looks that we have look at now, I'm going to use cycles as the base at which we compare everything with, because I think all of us are fairly familiar with cycles, and then we'll compare all the others back and forth. So I'm going to show a picture of cycles, then say Eevee, then go back to cycles, and then to Pro Render, and so forth. So this is the base render I did in here. So it's basically diffuse surfaces with some lights, hard shadow and soft shadow lights. And then the floor / wall, the cyc, is simple checker pattern with a little bit of bump mapping or normal mapping. I think I might have put a displacement on there. This was over a year ago. Anyway, so that looks nice. I like the reflections and the shadows, and the motion blur on the R, you can see, looks really nice. So I was very happy with that. So this is the Eevee render. So obviously this is a year ago. So there's some things like, I know we've got motion blur in Eevee now, so that's not in here. But if I flick between the two, you can see that they are very similar in terms of their lighting, subtle differences, but not too bad. But shadows there's a big difference with how shadows are portrayed. So using Eevee, I find you have to spend a little bit more time on getting your shadows to look how you want them. But the diffuse surfaces are very nice and almost identical, to be honest. Even the floor, if you look at the way the textures and the reflections work, they're very similar. And that, from a workflow point of view, is great, because you know that if you're working in Eevee for just initial development work, you can rely on what you're seeing to be 80%, 70% of what you're going to get if you're going to do final rendering cycles. It's just the shadows that you have to be a little bit more aware of. Okay, so we're back to cycles. And now this is the Lux Core render. Now, Lux Core Let me just give you a little bit of information. It's used in Blender, but there's plugins for 3D Studio Max, and it also has a standalone program that you can send a scene to, and it will render for you. It's been around for a while. It was initially called LuxRender, and it got forked to LuxCore, and it's open source. So it's fairly mature in its development, and I must say I really like the render. It has a photographic feel to me. Its aim is to be a sort of photoreal type renderer that's going to give you something that you can use in real life for things like ArcViz and that sort of thing. So if I flick between cycles, that's a cycles render, and that's LuxCore. You can see LuxCore's a little bit dark, and I'll come to lighting a little bit later in the talk, where you have to tweak the lighting a little bit. But I really like the shadows that you get here. So if you look at the D, on the inside of that D, that hole, the way the shadow is, it's got a soft edge, sort of a medium between a medium hard and a soft edge. Is Blender's cycles render, it's really hard. And the motion blur is just insanely awesome. So you can see the blur is actually starting to affect the E somewhat, purple E, that is. Whereas on the cycles render, it's not as pronounced. Again, these things can be changed with settings. The floor, you can see I've achieved a better displacement or normal map with cycles than I did with LuxCore. But LuxCore, that the highlight at the back just seems a little bit less obtrusive than it does in cycles. Right, next one is ProRender. So ProRender comes from AMD, and out of all the ones that I've used, it seems to have the biggest penetration in sort of the professional market. It looks to be partially open source. Reading on their website, parts of the program have been under the MIT license, it looks like. I don't know if everything is, but it's certainly free. It's used in Blender, obviously. You've got Cinema 4D, Modo, 3D Studio Max, Maya, Houdini, Unity, and loads more, lots of, I think, Creo and that sort of thing. So as a renderer, that if you're going to be in a pipeline where you've got other tools going to be feeding into this, it's a great renderer to use. And then obviously then by default, you've got a bigger community of resources to look into with this renderer. So if we look at the comparison, again, it gives a very nice render. And actually, for me, it feels it's the closest to cycles. In terms of lighting and the look and feel, that cycles ProRender. You'll see in some of the later images I'll show you a very similar thing. Again, the motion blur is very nice. Maybe not as nice as LuxCore's, but it's certainly out there. I seem to remember battling a little bit with the node setup to recreate this floor. More or less got it, but it's not quite like cycles. Right, and the last one is Appleseed. So Appleseed is also an open source renderer. I would call it's a very small community, but a very active community who use it. And I wouldn't quite call it production ready yet. It's used in some production packages. Gaffer is one of them, which is used in the film industry a lot. And there's a plugin for 3D Studio Max and Maya. But I think, and there's a standalone renderer as well for it, piece of software. I think generally, if it is being used in the professional environment, I think there's some support around it, people who are very close to the devs or that sort of thing. Certainly from a user point of view, it's very interesting to play around with it, because quite often on the forums, I'll upload a render and you get the people who are working on the code commenting and asking for scene files and that sort of thing. So it's a small, close-knit community, which is quite nice. I enjoy that. As you can see from the image, I sort of battled a little bit. Well, the node setup is very different to Cycles and EV and that sort of thing. So, and they don't have support for displacement yet, so the floor is flat. But it creates a really crisp render. It's a CPU-based render as well, whereas all the others use GPU. And if I flick between the two, you can see I didn't manage to get the depth of field working. It does have support for it, but didn't get it working in this render. Right, so where are we going to next? Okay, so I'm going to spend a lot more time on these things. So I thought, what would be a good idea is to actually look at sort of separate the texturing and the nodes and the shading from the lighting. So I did a bunch of grayscale renders. You can see all 5 of them here in a sort of collage. So let's dive into that. Okay, so there's your Cycles render. A bunch of bottles on a wall with a floor. It's like a wood. You'll see it's wood at the back. So the very first thing I noticed when doing this render, and it helped a lot, is the lighting setup does change quite dramatically between the renders. So doing a grayscale render, if you're going to be combining different renderers into a final comp, it's quite a good idea to do this sort of thing first. So if I go to Eevee, you can see the drop in shadow definition is quite massive. If you look at the tops of the bottles, you can see the lighting more or less stays the same. So the warm top light and the blue coming from the side is more or less the same, but where things get lost is in the definition of the shadows. I might have had the HDR on here a little bit hot, but basically what I try to do is try to stick to the same settings and then tweak from there. So definitely with Eevee, I would need to spend more time making sure I get the shadows working. And maybe use a separate pass for compositing to bring that sort of shadow look in a little bit more. Back to Cycles. So interesting now, so this is Lux Core. So Lux Core will use your the lights that have been set up for Cycles if you want to. So when I switch between the two, there is almost no difference. I mean, apart from some grain, but that's just a rendering thing. So that is incredibly useful. So if you want to switch across to Lux Core from Cycles, you're going to end up, and you don't have to do much to your lights at all. I did, in the next render, switch off the Cycles lights. So I'm now using the Lux Core settings for the lights. And it's a little bit brighter. I had to tweak it a little bit to bring it down. And it loses some of the warmth from the overhead lights. But by and large, Lux Core treats the sort of scene lights that you got from Cycles really nicely. And here's Pro Render. So now again, if I switch between Cycles and Pro Render, very evenly matched. I did have to do some tweaking to the lights, but the one thing which I really liked about Pro Render is it seems to be better at giving you some hard edge shadows. Again, something you can do in Cycles, but if you just switching from one render to another, it's quite nice just to have that as a default. So you can see on the wall especially, you get that second drop down shadow coming from the top lights. So this is Appleseed. So again, not that much difference. The only thing I noticed, and you'll see it in the color renders now, is there seems to be almost like a Fresnel effect that's happening on everything. So you've got nothing on the edge. If you look at the edge of the bottles and I switch to Appleseed, you can see that the highlights show up there. All right, so let's show you all the stuff in color now. So this is the cycles render. Now, every time I render in cycles, it's amazing. It's gorgeous. And the node setup in cycles is, although we're missing some nodes, it is very artist friendly and super flexible. You can really just dive in and get something that you want out of it. This is Eevee. So yeah, the glass doesn't look right. So obviously Eevee being a real-time renderer, glass is still one of those hurdles it's got to get through properly. There's lots of caveats. So I would probably try to do glass through compositing with Eevee. But just to show off Eevee's flexibility, I mean, it's just amazing. All those diffuse and glossy surfaces are just amazing. It's incredible. And for me, Eevee is the future of rendering for me. The motion graphic designer, to be able to render so quickly. You know, okay, I'm going to lose something, but I gain more with Eevee than I lose. Cycles again. All right, so this is LuxCore. It might look a little bit grainy. I don't know if you're going to see that through the feed, but LuxCore gives an amazingly photo real render. So that's cycles, and that's LuxCore. So the glass especially just looks absolutely gorgeous. It deals with the displacement nicely. It's got a good set of nodes itself, and they're missing some, but by and large, it's really good. It can use some of Cycle's nodes as well, which is nice. And of course, it's quite a slow render, but not too bad. Okay, so here's ProRender. Now, ProRender, I started to, again, it looks nice, not as nice as the others, but I'm just showing you a sort of broken render here. So the displacement, although it works, I started to get weird artifacting happening. So what I did is I just removed the displacement and did a render with just the glass with normal mapping and that sort of thing. And it looks really, really nice. The lighting might be a little bit too hot compared to Cycles. So there's Cycles and there's ProRender, but by and large, it looks amazing. I really like the subtle displacement that happens from the normal map in the glass. Right, and lastly is Appleseed. So Appleseed, being CPU rendered, took longer, obviously, and I'll show you some stats now. Noise was an issue. And this is where I'd say experience probably would help. On the edges, I sort of got that Fresnel effect started to show up as almost as render errors for me. So I'm definitely going to put this image onto the forum and see what I can do to improve this, make it look really nice. Incidentally, Appleseed doesn't have support for displacement yet, so we'll get, hopefully that will come shortly. Right, so timings, that's Cycles for you. That's 1 hour, 4 minutes, 58 seconds. Eevee, 3 minutes. I mean, that's, you know, for what you're getting, 3 minutes is amazing. Yeah, incredible. LuxCore, 4 hours. Now, incidentally, this is rendering on my laptop. So this is just a Dell, a couple of years old laptop, 1080 graphics card and an i5 7th gen processor. But the CPU renderer in here isn't great. I think it's hampered by cooling. So 4 hours for the LuxCore render, which took a while, but it was particularly good. ProRenderer, interestingly, was 23 minutes. So it's a very, very efficient renderer. So from a production point of view, if you've got a renderer that's 23 minutes as opposed to 1 hour, that's a big saving. And if you can use it in different packages, it's a very good option if you're going to be working in a diverse workflow environment. And that's Appleseed, 18 hours, 25 minutes and 19 seconds. I don't think that's entirely accurate because, again, like I say, my laptop has a problem with CPU rendering. It seems to be held back. And it was an i5, it's not an i7. But CPU rendering is a very good option for people who have massive render farms that exist already, or you've got bandwidth or memory issues with rendering to a GPU card, and your memory limits will exceed what the GPU can do for you. So Appleseed, from that point of view, is very, very useful. All right, I don't know, how much time do I have left? Is there any more time, Alex, or is it time for me to give the platform back to you?
A couple of minutes, Gareth.
Okay.
It's okay, no problem.
All right.
Thank you.
So this is, I just want to quickly show you the multipass, because this for me is very useful and for a lot of sort of VFX and that sort of thing. This showing you the different multipass renders that the different packages can do. So this is cycles, and it gives you a really nice set of multipasses, and it's got AOVs now, which is really useful. So that's this little gray one down in the bottom right hand corner with the Coke in black. So you can, in your node setup, spit off different passes that have different parts of your material setup. It's quite useful. EV is still limited somewhat. It's got some of the basics, and over time it'll get some more. These black areas will be passes that are there, but you can't see them because you've got to put it through some nodes. LuxCore has a nice set of render passes for you to attack. ProRender, I would say, has the most. Doesn't have AOVs in the way that Cycles does them, but it does spit out a huge amount of information for you to do stuff with. And lastly is Appleseed. Again, also gives you quite a lot of passes to deal with. All right, so that's it. That's my talk. If you need to get hold of me, there's my details on the screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put all these images up on my website so that you guys, because you might quite rightly not see everything properly on the talk from the stream. So if you want to have a closer look with, on your own time, I'll put all the images up there for you guys to have a look. And please feel free to throw me some questions either now or after the talk. Thank you.